All right, welcome back, everyone. In this video, we'll talk about how the grading works in this class. So sharing my screen again. So first of all, if I click down here on important documents, one of the documents I quickly referred to, but then said we'd talk about later, is this document that says rubrics. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that now. So the big thing you need to know is that you've likely never had a class that grades quite like I do, at least not a math class that grades quite like I do. So instead of, I would say this is probably most people's experience, is that you maybe take a test or a quiz or something like that, and your teacher will say, okay, this problem's worth 8 points, and you earned 5 out of the 8 points, something like that. And so that's probably what most math classes do. So I don't do that. Instead, what I do is I try to break the class down into topics, which I call standards. And for each standard, my goal is to basically just figure out what level of mastery you have on that standard. So this rubrics document lists all the different topics. And for each of the topics, I'm going to, like I said, give you a level of mastery. Now up here, this is called my general rubric, which just gives you a ballpark idea of what each of these 5 levels of mastery is kind of supposed to represent. So on a given topic, I might say you're an expert in it. And so it says the ability to accurately address the most complex and advanced problems within an objective has been demonstrated. Proficient, that generally means the ability to apply concepts appropriately and with accuracy to address standard problems. That's been demonstrated by the student. On the most complex problems, though, there may be some sort of flaw in the strategy. If you're developing, then you definitely have factual information about the topic demonstrated. You use kind of the appropriate methods, but there's flaws going on in the execution. And on more complex problems, you're not quite able to kind of connect the concepts together to get to a completely accurate answer. If you're at the novice level, you show a basic understanding of the topic or the objective, but maybe you're limited to just recalling factual information about it, and only being able to do the most simple tasks in it. And then not yet just means you haven't demonstrated any evidence of understanding yet. So this might be like leaving a problem blank or something like that. Now, for shorthand, what I do is, just because it's kind of cumbersome for me to write all these out, is I give you a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4 for each topic. But just understand that those are not numbers that you're meant to average or anything like that. Those are just simply stand-ins for expert, proficient, developing, and so on. Now, of course, this general rubric is very general. So what I've done is I've written up one of these for every standard in the class, or every topic. And so standard number 1, which is that first module I showed in the last video, is all about solving absolute value, polynomial, radical, and rational equations algebraically. And this describes what it will look like for you to be an expert, or to be proficient, or to be developing, and so on. And this is the case for every single standard. And so what's going to happen is you are going to be given tests. Essentially, I call them assessments. And on those assessments, rather than having a giant score at the top that says something like you got 83%, what you're going to have is just every single standard that appears on that assessment, you're going to be given either a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, which of course just stand in for not yet, novice, developing, proficient, or expert. All right, so let's talk about actually taking assessments. So the first time that will come up is down here. We'll take an assessment over standards 1 through 5. So that particular assessment is going to occur Tuesday, January 17th. Now, you are going to take these in a proctored testing environment. So I'm going to click here on important assessment information. So let me start with this. If you are in the Yakima area, we have a proctored testing center, and these are the hours that it's open. You'll see that on Monday through Wednesday, it's 8:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so I always try to make sure that my assessments are on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday at the very least, so that you have until 9 p.m. to come in and take it, especially if you're working days or something like that. In Grandview, we have, and actually, I think I need to update this. I'm sorry, I totally forgot to. They've expanded their hours a little bit, so I'm going to fix this right after the video. It should say 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that's for Yakima and Grandview. Now, if you are outside the district area, so you're not in Yakima County, then you can get other proctors, but there's a form you need to fill out and submit to YVC that basically gets the proctor approved. And so if you need a different proctor than one of these two, then please let me know immediately, and I will get you the form that you need to fill out. And you'll want to start that process right away, because it does take some time for you to submit it and for it to get approved and all that. And when you do go into these proctored testing centers, they're just going to be paper pencil tests. So I'm not going to have you worry about taking it on a computer or anything like that. And I'll remind you of this before our first assessment, but there's just some important things to remember. One thing I'll just point out now is that they do want a picture ID. Let me know if that might be an issue for you, but really any kind of picture ID will do. So you take that, and like I said, what will happen then is I will take those assessments based on the rubrics that I've created. I will grade those assessments, and like on that first one, you'll just have 5 different levels of mastery assigned to you, as opposed to a big score at the top. Now, you probably heard me mention in the previous video that I really believe in the growth mindset, that just because you don't get something right away doesn't mean you're not going to get it. And so I've kind of vaguely mentioned this idea that you have the opportunity to reassess and to bring scores up. So what happens is throughout the quarter, you're going to have opportunities to reassess on standards. So I think probably the best place for me to talk about this, at least in a visual way, is here on the calendar. All right, so we talked about standards 1 through 5 assessment is going to be on the 17th. And then standards 6 through 11 assessment is going to be on February 1st. Now, if I go ahead a week, on February 8th, so a week after the 6 through 11 assessment, there's going to be the opportunity for you to reassess on standards 1 through 11. So the way that's going to work is you'll go into the proctored testing center, just like you did for your previous assessments, and you'll ask for this standards 1 through 11 reassessment. And it's going to have questions from all 11 of those standards. And what you'll do is you'll pick whichever of those 11 you want to reassess on. So theoretically, you could reassess on all of them. You could just say, I want to bring my score up on all 11, and you could reassess on all of them. You could reassess on just one, or you could not show up and reassess on none of them. And so it's totally up to you, completely your choice. So when I get these handed in to me, usually there's some blank and some that are done. And whatever you get on the reassessment replaces what you had before. So if before you were developing on standard 1, which would mean you had a 2, which stands for developing. And then on February 8th, you got a 4, which means expert on that particular topic. Your new score is a 4. It completely replaces it. There's no penalty for having your better grade happen on the reassessment. So you can, even if you really kind of stumble on your first assessment, that doesn't mean that your grade is sunk in this class. you can still get an A in the class, even if you have a really bad assessment early on. Now, what I will say, of course, and I think students figure this out for themselves rather quickly, is that you really want to do well on the first assessment to the greatest extent that you can, because of course the challenge of doing these reassessments is that you are working on them while you're also learning new material. So that's a lot, right? So as you're trying to, say, okay, if I'm going to take this standards 1 through 11 reassessment, of course, you're going to study for it a lot. And that's in the midst of having to learn the current material. So it's obviously really to your advantage to do as well as you can at the beginning. But if you stumble a little bit, no problem, you can bring that up. And so it goes on like that. There'll be more assessments, and then there will also be reassessments. And then I'll just point out that the very, very end of the quarter, the 13th is our last day of class before the final. I do give you the opportunity, you see how that says standards 1 through 23 reassessment, pick 5. So the idea is on that very last day, I'll let you pick up to 5 standards from throughout the earlier in the quarter that you might still want to reassess on, that, even after the reassessment, you still want to improve a little bit. So there will be kind of a last chance at the very end for at least a few standards from throughout the quarter. So one kind of statement I want to make here is that when it comes to, and actually let's do this. Let me go ahead and open the grade book of my fake student here. So when you're looking in your grade book, really the part of your grade that matters are your levels of mastery. So up here, these are your Newton assignments and written assignments and things like that. That'll get filled in throughout the quarter. But then down here are your levels of mastery. This is what really matters. And I've filled in some fake grades for my fake student here to kind of show what that looks like. This is all that matters, but this is really important. This 82.41% right here means absolutely nothing. So don't look at the only thing you should ever look at percentages for is for assignments. Okay, so you want to have 100, close to 100% on your assignments, but this means nothing. Your grade in this class is completely determined by your levels of mastery on all these different standards. And like I said, I use 0 through 4 just as a shorthand for expert, proficient, etc. But you're not supposed to add these up and average them or anything like that, like they're doing here. So just ignore this number at the bottom. Now, how do I determine your grade is, of course, a very important question. So let's open up the syllabus to take a look at that. So in the syllabus, a couple pages in, is how I determine grades. And you look at this table, you might say, I don't understand this at all. I think if you looked at it for long enough, you certainly would figure it out. But the long and short of it is that what I'm doing is I'm counting up how many of each level of mastery you have in the class. So how many experts do you have? How many proficients do you have, and so on? And that's going to determine your grade. So for example, if you get 21 or more experts and all the rest proficients, then you get a solid A in the class, and so on and so forth. Now, I understand this is not the most user-friendly thing. So this is what I use, but and as I'm clicking here, just a general comment I would say is that from the very beginning, when I started grading like this, students have loved it. The one exception was when I first started doing it, they said, I have no idea what my grade is. I don't get, and that makes students understandably uneasy. So one of the things I did to help with that is under important links, I made this grade projector. And on this grade projector, what you can do is after each assessment, you can put in the number for each level of mastery that you got. So like, let's say I took that standards 1 through 5 assessment And I got a 4 on standard 1, a 3 on standard 2, 3 on standard 3, 4 on standard 4, and a 2 on standard 5. If I just put those in, this grade projector will spit out the letter grade that part of the syllabus would say that I have at this point. Now, this is something you got to be careful about. What this is doing is it's projecting out and saying, what's the projected number of experts if you got 2 experts on these first 5 standards? What's the projected number of developing if you got 1 developing those 5 standards? So what this is doing is it's really going to exaggerate the results of standards 1 through 5 assessment. So like if I change this 4 to a 1, it took me all the way down to a C minus, just one change in a grade. Now, the reason it's doing that is because it's looking at the fact that you got a 1 here and said, okay, in total, there's 27 standards. So we expect that you're going to get about 5 1s or 5 novices throughout the quarter. Well, that very well may not happen. And furthermore, especially if you're putting this in right after the initial assessment, you're probably going to bring this up on the reassessment, right? So then you can say, all right, well, I don't think I'm going to keep this at a 1. I think I'm going to get a 4 on it next time. And this standard 5, that one was hard for me, but I'm confident that I can at least get it up to a 3. Okay. And then maybe this standard 2, I think I can bring that up to a 4. And then all of a sudden you're back up to a B+. So just understand that, especially when we don't have very many standards under our belts yet that have been assessed, this is a really volatile tool to use. So just be careful. And if you're ever really nervous about your grade, send me a Canvas message or meet me on Zoom and we'll talk it through. Okay. But you can do this throughout. And then here's like at the end of the quarter, you can put them all in and it'll, say what grade you have. And you can play around. These are nice because you can play around with them. If I replace this 2 with a 4, does that change my grade? Yeah, I brought it up a half letter grade. And so this is a much more user-friendly way of kind of wrapping your brain around what grade you have in a class at any given moment. Now, the last piece of this grade is you might be wondering, okay, you talked about assessments, you talked about reassessments. What about a final exam? So I do have a final exam in the class. And the way that it works is on final exams, usually or I would say always, some topics are asked about and others aren't, right? Just any final exam in general. It'll be the same in here. So we have 26 different topics, 26 different standards in the class that could appear on the final, but I would say probably not even quite half are going to appear on the final, maybe right around half. So for the half that don't appear on the final at all, whatever grade you had going into the final on that standard, that's what you have at the end. If you do have a topic that appears on the final, if you do better on the final than you had before, so let's say before you had a 2 and now you have a 4, you have a 4. It's just like a reassessment. It replaces the old one. Okay, but what if you do worse, right? And final exams are hard, so that might happen on a topic or 2. So if you do worse on the final, what I do is I average out what you had before with what you got on the final. And actually, let me just to be real clear on this, open up a little document here. So let's say we're talking about standard 3. Let's say I ask about it. Let's say we'll say standard 3 before the final. Let's say you had a 4 going into it. On the final, though, you got a 2. That would mean your standard 3 grade is a 3, because of course, if you average 4 and 2, you get a 3. So 3, which would mean you have a proficient on that particular standard. So that's pretty easy to understand, right? The one where it's a little more tricky is, let's say I ask about standard 5. And let's say you had a 3 going into the final. And on the final, you got a 2. So your standard 3 grade, or standard 5 grade, excuse me, is going to be half of a proficient and half of a developing. And the reason that it's half is because if you average 3 and 2, you get 2.5, right? Well, 2.5 is kind of meaningless in this kind of grading system. So it makes sense that you would get credit for half of a 3 and half of a 2 when I'm tallying up, how many proficients did you have? How many developing did you have? Now, this little nuance here you might forget about. I'll definitely remind you of it as we get closer to the final at the end. But that's how it works. So replace grades when it's better. I average grades when you do worse on the final than you had going in. All right, the very last thing I just want to point out here is after all this business of talking about how your grade is completely based on your levels on these standards, and it's all about assessments and reassessments and things like that, you might be wondering, okay, what's all this homework? Do we get any credit for homework? Are we just supposed to do it and there's no credit for it? And so there is credit for your homework, and I'll show you how, but it fits into this whole standards-based grading system that I use. So one thing I didn't show you when I opened up this rubric document before is I'll go to the very bottom. I mentioned there's 26 different topics, right? 26 different standards. But in this rubric document, you will find a 27th. So the 27th standard is homework completion. And it's just, I know it's kind of silly to say things like you're an expert or you're proficient at homework, but at the end of the day, what I'm doing is I'm giving you credit for homework based on the idea that if you have 90 to 100%, you'll get an expert, you'll get a 4. 80 to 90, you'll get a 3. And so this is really important. And you might think, well, it's only one of 27 standards, but it really comes into play because as you're tallying up things like how many experts did you get, how many proficients did you get, you basically get an expert for free. You get a free 4 as long as you are diligent about doing your homework. And then, of course, the other side of the coin is that you just need the homework to really be successful, right? That's how you're going to get yourself to a point where you're going to do great on the assessments. So that's how homework works. The last thing that I'll say is, of course, all of this is in the calendar, but I want to open up the syllabus one last time just because it's written out in a nice convenient way here in the syllabus. So here's the anticipated test dates or assessment dates. And so you can take a look at these and the hours that you can go into the proctored testing center. And here's in the syllabus, there's a link to that same, there's a link here. So it talks about the computer lab hours. These are the hours that you can go in and have your assessments proctored. All right, so if you have any questions at all, please do let me know. There's a lot of moving parts to how my grading works. Usually once students get used to it, they really like it, but you very well might have questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you have. And I look forward to having a great quarter. Thanks.